Does this make sense? It seems like such a simple question. A question we should never hesitate to ask ourselves. A question we should teach our kids to ask themselves. And yet it seems to me like parents no longer teach their kids to ask that simple question. It seems that parents don't teach their kids to question things. Now, I'm familiar with the old adage that a child should be seen and not heard. And there are definitely times when that sentiment should be adhered to. Sometimes a child needs to understand that their silence is important at a particular moment, at a particular time and place. Say, for example, Dad just got pulled over for speeding. Your little one should really just stay quiet until it's over. You can just hear some little kid responding when the officer says, "Sir, do you know how fast you were going?" And all of a sudden you hear a little voice from the back seat say, "Yeah, Dad, you were going pretty fast." That's an easy situation to understand where your son or daughter should understand to keep their mouth shut. But most of the time, kids should know that asking questions is absolutely appropriate. It's essential for them to learn and understand the world around them. In this video, I'm making the argument that teaching your kids to ask the simple question, does this make sense? That it is very important. It's critically important for a number of reasons. It's an incredibly important question to teach them to ask. Now, to help me make my point, there's an old movie called Uncle Buck, directed by John Hughes and starring the late great John Candy in the title role and Macaulay Culkin in his kid prime. I'm about to show a clip from that movie. It's a funny scene in the first act of the film where Uncle Buck is introducing himself to his brother's kids that he's babysitting. This is a great example of what a kid should do, how they should behave when meeting someone in a situation like this. Enjoy.
Where do you live?
In the city.
Do you have a house?
Apartment.
Own or rent?
Rent.
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
How come?
It's a long story.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
How come?
It's an even longer story.
Are you my dad's brother?
What's your record for consecutive questions asked?
38.
I'm your dad's brother, all right.
You have much more hair on your nose than my dad.
How nice of you to notice.
I'm a kid, that's my job.
What's your record for consecutive questions asked? The reply, 38. Everything about that scene's great. Watch Uncle Buck sometime. Very funny movie and a feel-good one as well. That's how my son interacted with adults most of the time when he met someone new when he was a little kid. No, he didn't exactly do the rapid-fire question after question thing shown in the clip, but he was an inquisitive, curious kid. Not one hiding in the corner, not shy, not spooked for some unknown nebulous reason. He was a kid being a kid and asking questions. That curiosity is so important to ingrain in your child. It will serve them, benefit them for their lifetime. My brother still has an unbridled curiosity in the world. His intellectual curiosity amazes me. He never went to college. It wasn't his thing. He has built a very successful business and lives a life most people dream of living. But it's his intellectual curiosity that always gets me. He has a basic knowledge of so many things that I've never seen him at a loss for words, no matter who he strikes up a conversation with. It could be a doctor, a specialist, a stockbroker, a plumber, an arborist. It doesn't matter. He always seems to ask good questions of these people, and they instantly become engaged in an enjoyable conversation because they realize my brother isn't appeasing them with some nonsensical or meaningless conversation, like, how's the weather? He's legitimately curious to learn more about what they do. I'm always amazed watching him carry on a conversation with someone, anyone. I'm very thankful my son has seen this happen many times over the years. That's what kids are supposed to do. Ask questions. That's how they learn. It's how they grow up and begin to understand how things work in the world. And after they ask literally thousands of questions to learn basic things, they need to understand. Then they take that knowledge, gleaned from all those basic questions, they process that information in their head, and then they ask the really important question. Does this make sense? You see, asking all those basic questions gives you this big pile of data, information, facts. What's important is putting that pile of data in some logical format, some organized sequence, so you can process that data to reach the all-powerful conclusion of understanding. Gathering the what and the how are the first steps in understanding the why. Kids need to learn to ask the most fundamental of all questions. Does this make sense? Because that's when real thinking takes place. Now, I haven't mentioned critical thinking in a while, but this is a great place to bring it up again. Let me give you an example of why asking, does this make sense, matters so much. I took a basic intro to philosophy class early on in college. The first day, the professor walks around the class. He asks each student their birth date. He has 12 folders in his hands. He goes to the one where your birth date falls, and he hands you a piece of paper from that folder. The piece of paper has your zodiac sign at the top. My piece of paper had Leo at the top. Virtually all the zodiac signs were represented by the time the professor got through with every student in the class. Now, with all seriousness, he asked each student to read the paper. He asked, does the information written on your paper, your zodiac sign, seem correct? Does it describe you? And I gotta admit, I read it and I thought, wow, that's me. I'm a Leo. After a few minutes of virtually everyone in the class being flabbergasted at the apparent accuracy of our zodiac sign description, the professor tells us to compare our sheets. It didn't matter what zodiac sign was written on the top of the page. The information written on every piece of paper was the same. Everyone's description was the same. The lesson was important. An expert, our professor, a learned person with a PhD, with all the seriousness in the world, presented us with data that we swallowed hook, line, and sinker. If anyone in that class had asked a simple question, does this make sense? The charade he was putting on would have probably fallen apart quicker. Because of who was presenting that data and how they presented that data, we were easily manipulated into believing the veracity of that data. Does this make sense? It's a powerful question, one we need to teach our kids to ask. That's a question that should pop into their minds all the time, not just consciously, but subconsciously, without hesitation. Our brains should be conditioned to ask that question. Now, let me shift to the last few generations. Because parents no longer stress upon their kids the importance of asking questions, the importance of questioning authority, and the diminishment of the development of critical thinking skills, these past few generations have become dangerously susceptible to mindlessly absorbing bad data and coming to bad conclusions. These past few generations have been conditioned to, without hesitation or individual thought, accept as pure fact anything told to them by a teacher, a scientist, an expert. Now, should we listen to what these individuals have to say? Absolutely. Most of them have spent years focusing on an area to develop their expertise, and their words should carry more weight in that area of expertise than someone holding just opinions about that subject. But that doesn't mean, that is to say, it doesn't mean we, and that's to say your kids, they shouldn't shelve their brain because some so-called expert is speaking. Now, here's a huge red flag when dealing with experts that you should teach your kids to listen for. It's very important. When someone has to throw out their credentials, I'm a doctor, I'm a PhD, I'm a professor, so on, that always tells me that individual probably doesn't have a strong argument. You see, if you've got facts, logic, and reason on your side, you don't need to proclaim your credentials. A well-articulated argument backed by facts, logic, and reason should and probably will prevail. Someone sharing their credentials to help win an argument, that's weak. It's an attempt by the expert to cut off any debate. It's their objective to stop you from asking the simple question, does this make sense? Experts aren't the only ones that do this. We as parents are guilty of this all the time. Have you ever said to your son or daughter, because I said so? Or, I'm the parent. Maybe you're the child and I'm the adult. All parents do this, and it's not right. You got to stop doing it. As a parent, you need to welcome discourse. You need to accept questions and debate from your kids if you want to teach your kids to think for themselves and develop critical thinking skills. Home is the first place that should occur. It's the safest place to develop those skills. It's the most logical place for those skills to be developed first. Now, I'm not going to tell the whole story here. It's a long one to tell, but I encourage you to watch the documentary Enron, the smartest guys in the room. What started the fall of Enron? A young woman, Bethany McLean. She couldn't understand how Enron made money. She was the first reporter to question Enron's earnings. She asked the simplest of questions. Does this make sense? Her asking that simple question began the downfall of what was the 7th largest publicly traded company at that time. That's how powerful that simple question is. Watch that documentary. It's as entertaining as it is shocking, as it is appalling. Find some time and watch it. My hat's off to Bethany McLean's parents for raising an independent, confident, good decision maker. Their efforts in raising their daughter to be an ICD adult helped expose one of the largest financial frauds in U.S. history. Enron's management team were considered experts. And just like my professor that tricked our class regarding our zodiac signs, Enron's management team spoke confidently. They touted their expertise and they silenced their critics based on that perceived expertise. Teach your kids to question even experts. Real experts welcome debate and critique. Real experts don't attempt to silence their critics by throwing their credentials in the face. Teach your kids to ask the simple yet powerful question, does this make sense? It will benefit them in so many ways throughout their life. Thanks for listening.